I think we can get started with today's presentation. Again, thank you and good afternoon for attending the Russell Sage Best Writing webinar for our upcoming LOI deadline. My name is Deandra Durand. I'm a program assistant with the Russell Sage Foundation, and I'm going to allow my colleagues to introduce themselves at this moment.
Maya?
Hi, everyone. I'm Maya. I'm a program assistant with RSF.
Hi, I'm Stephen Glauser. I'm a program officer here at RSF.
And I'm Aixa Cintrón-Vélez. I'm a program director at Russell Sage.
Excellent. So at this time, again, we're going to be turning off our cameras very shortly, so that way there could be more focus on the presentation. In the meantime, feel free to listen along. Thank you. Maya, take it away.
So a few housekeeping notes for today. This meeting is being recorded. We ask that you use the Q&A section for any questions. We're happy to take questions, but we ask that you refrain from asking specific project-related questions. Those can go in our inbox, which is programs@rsage.org. You can email us with questions that you have that are specific to your project, or if we don't happen to get to your question during the hour that we have for the webinar today. Today, we're going to start with a little bit of RSF history, talk about what our funding priorities are, what we do fund, what we don't fund. We have a new initiative that we're excited to announce. We're going to get into our funding mechanisms, talk about three main categories of grants that we give: our core research grants, our pipeline and dissertation research grants, and other funding mechanisms that we have. And then we're going to close with a discussion of our application and review process, because I know that is what you are all going to be going through in the next coming months.
So a little bit about who we are. The Russell Sage Foundation was founded in 1907, making it one of the oldest philanthropic foundations in the United States. We basically have two phases to our foundation. The first phase from 1907 to 1944, the Russell Sage Foundation was more directly involved in poverty reduction and urban planning, all for the improvement of social and living conditions in the United States. From 1945 to the present, the Russell Sage Foundation pivoted to get away from direct involvement in terms of reducing inequality in the United States to source towards social science research in the hopes of strengthening methods, data, and theoretical social sciences, and so that there could be better understanding of how to improve the social and living conditions in the United States. And that is where we are today.
Hi, so I'll chat a little bit about how we see our priorities, and this is just as Deandra mentioned, we focus on work that is relevant to the United States. So projects have to be focused on the United States. We occasionally will fund some comparative work or something like that. If there's a question about whether your work would count as this, we really encourage you to send an email to us at programs@rsage.org. We'll probably mention this a few times throughout today's presentation, but yeah, something like a little abstract or a little short description of the work that you're trying to do, we'll really be able to be like, yeah, this may be a fit or this may not be a fit. Work that we really like is work that is looking at newly available data or novel uses of existing data. We fund work that does original data collection. We fund work such as field experiments, in-depth qualitative interviews, ethnographies. These can be survey experiments, things like that. We also fund work using like existing data sets, combining data sets, things like that. All of those are very normal things that we see. I do want to go over this sort of do not fund, because that helps a lot. One thing that Russell Sage tries to do is really find our niche. And that logic is often that there are other, often larger foundations funding in a lot of areas. So we're trying to sort of not step on their toes or not repeat their efforts. This is particularly notable for health or mental health outcomes. If they are on the sort of like the right side of the equation, we're a little bit less interested in them. You can go to places like the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, NIH, et cetera. This does not mean we're not interested in health at all or ever. If it's one of many outcomes you're looking at, it's certainly possible to still get funded with us. Or a lot of times health can be on the other side of the equation where you are looking at disparate health outcomes and then potentially their effects on, I don't know, the labor market or on credit scores or on things like that. So those are all sort of possible things. Again, please email us if you're sort of thinking about whether your project is a fit or not. On the topic of education, we are interested in some things like educational attainment, particularly as we get closer to the labor market. So that we're talking like high school, college level attainment and things like that. But we are not interested in sort of the nitty gritty of curriculum development or how teachers feel about about their work or various in the weeds educational processes. We would really sort of expect that you go to a place like the Spencer Foundation for something like that. And then on one last note is if you're looking at sort of publicly available data, stuff that is just freely available, like the General Social Survey, the PSID, the HGS, the CPS, and you're doing a pretty standard sort of regressions or something like that on that data, we sort of aren't interested in funding that as much. If you're looking at something that's like the restricted access part of any of those data sets, that suddenly becomes a little bit more interesting. Or if you are doing something creative with it that hasn't been done before, that's also possible. But we're sort of talking about these routine analyses we're less interested in. And you should note on the note on the bottom, we don't have any restrictions based on your citizenship as long as the work is US focused. For most of our funding streams, we don't mind if your institution is outside of the US, as long as you're focusing on the US. The only one that we do have a restriction on is our dissertation grants program. That we do require that the institution be US based. But for a lot of our other grants programs, we're fine if you're from outside of the US, you're at a university in Canada or the United Kingdom or anywhere else. And if you're doing work that is related to the US, we're able to fund you there. All right, you can go to the next slide. So here I'll talk about our specific program areas. And if there's one thing you take away from this talk, I would want that to be that we at Russell Sage acknowledge that there is a lot of overlap between these program areas. There's obviously a relationship between race and ethnicity and inequality. And so if you are sort of thinking about, and between many of the other programs as well. So if you are sort of like thinking about which program to apply to and you're stressing about it, please don't stress too much about it. In that aforementioned email that you may send us, you can ask which we think you fit best in. But it's often the case that a project could fit in one or more than one of these or at the intersection of it, and we'll sort of make that decision internally. So we sort of recommend that you apply to the program that you think you fit best in. And if we disagree, we'll move it or something like that. We're not so siloed that we'll just reject because you applied to the wrong program. So I hope I can alleviate some of the stress about which program area that you apply to. That being said, I'll talk a little bit about each of them. We have the evolution of our behavioral economics program that we had for a long time is now called the Behavioral Science and Decision Making in Context program. We have a long-running Future of Work program where we focus on worker conditions, we focus on emerging technologies, worker power, unionization sort of efforts, things like that. We have a program that evolved out of our former cultural contact and immigration programs that got combined into one that we call our race, ethnicity, and immigration program. And then again, another evolution, we used to call it social inequality, but we wanted to sort of signal that we have a more expansive interest in inequality. So we now call it the Social, Political, and Economic Inequality Program. These are our long-running sort of permanent program areas. You can think about them. I guess I don't know how permanent they are. The board can always change their mind. But in addition to those, we have two current special initiatives that are of interest to us. One is co-funded with the Carnegie Corporation, and that is on immigration and immigrant integration. So that's in addition and sort of sits under our race, ethnicity, and immigration program, but it's a specific interest in the integration process, both immigration's effects on the native population, how the immigrant population integrates into our society among a whole range of outcomes. Before I should note that before I go too much further into all of this, each of these program areas has an RFP on our website, and each of these special initiatives has an RFP on our website, where we list a number of topic areas for each of them and example research questions. I will note that these research questions are not all inclusive. We are not pretending that these are the only research questions that we're interested in, but they are examples of the sorts of research questions that we are interested in. And if you peruse those, it'll sort of give you a good idea of the types of things that each program is concentrating on, and that may help you decide which one is the best fit. And then so finally, we have a new special initiative this is going to be the first deadline this coming April, and it is on promoting educational attainment and economic mobility among racially, ethnically, and economically diverse groups after the 2023 Supreme Court decision to ban race-conscious college admissions policies. Internally, I don't remember what we're referring to this as because it's way too long of a name, but it's essentially the Affirmative Action Went Away, What Now initiative. And that's being co-funded with the Hewlett Foundation, the Spencer Foundation, and the WT Grant Foundation. At this deadline, we are accepting LOIs across all of these initiatives and program areas. And I think I'm going to pass it on to my colleague for the next slide.
Thank you, Stephen. So at 117 years old, Russell's Age is an old place, and old places tend to change slowly. But what we'll see throughout this presentation is that a lot is in the work currently at the foundation, especially having to do with the development and support of a new generation of scholars who care about and do work around pressing contemporary social issues. Besides identifying and helping to support the research of emerging scholars, another way in which the foundation can respond to emerging issues is through its special initiatives. Special initiatives are typically time-limited, involve more than one funder, and might address issues that are new or previously outside of our core program areas. The most recent example is our special initiative on the effects of the June of 2023 Supreme Court decision to end the use of race-conscious policies in admissions to colleges and universities. You can check out details on our webpage, but the short version is that we are looking to identify and support interesting new work that uses cutting-edge empirical strategies and or new and underutilized sources of data. The work can be retrospective or prospective, can address new or persistent questions, and the main thing is that it's methodologically rigorous. Some of the questions of interest include things like what is different about this decision compared to earlier decisions, and to what extent the decision reflects public opinions about the use of race-conscious criteria, not only in higher education admissions, but also in other contexts. Another possibility is that you examine the effects that the decision has had on institutional and organizational practices inside and outside higher education. Another possibility, what might be viable and efficient alternatives for attaining racial and ethnic diversity, equity, and inclusion in the higher education context or outside that context. And another possibility is to look into what ways and to what extent racial and ethnic diversity in selective colleges and universities matter both for the quality of the educational experience and for after college opportunities. So please take a look at the request for proposals on the website, and feel free to raise questions during our Q&A. Next slide.
So the next LOI deadline will be this April 16th, so that is a little more than a month away. Eligibility requirements include that you must hold a PhD. And basically our grants kind of fall into two buckets. You're either presidential grants or trustee grants, and that's really determined based on how much funding you're requesting. So if you are requesting 75,000 and lower, then your grant will be a presidential grant. If you are requesting 200,000 or up 75,000 to 200,000, which is our cap, then you will be considered a trustee grant. There are no indirect costs on presidential grants, and for trustee grants, there is a 15% indirect cost. And grants with the Russell Sage Foundation go for 1 to 2 years. For our regular research grant cycles, it is a two-step application process. So at your first stage, you're going to submit a 4-page, single-spaced LOI, and your CV of no more than 5 pages. In your LOI, make sure to, and we'll get to this later, but you just want to really focus on basically the meats and potatoes of your project. It is really a snapshot of what your whole project is. If you make it past that time, then you'll be invited to submit a full proposal, which includes the full proposal of up to 20 pages. The budget justification, a response to reviewer memo, which we will touch later on, and any other supporting documents. Just a quick note on the LOIs. Since it is a 4-page limit, that does not include any charts or figures, survey draft, if you're doing survey experiments, or any references. Those are excluded from the 4-page count limit. Generally speaking, we have 3 grant cycles a year in the spring, summer, and fall. Budgets could include summer salary, data collection, and research assistance or access to data. Generally, we do request, we request that all data sets that you may be creating are made publicly available. However, we do allow for some exceptions, but you must, provide reason for those exceptions. And if you are submitting a project that includes experiments, all experiments must be pre-registered. Let's go on to the next slide, please. So our early career grants, these are more newer initiatives, and they're really designed to help us diversify the social science field, and also internally as well. We have 2 new initiatives. So we have the pipeline grants, which is aimed towards professors, assistant professors, lecturers, and lecturers post-PhD January 1st, 2014, who have never received a research grant from us. And the other bucket is a dissertation research grants, which are small grants for PhD candidates who are enrolled at US institutions that are at their ABD stage. So I'm going to first talk a little bit more about the pipeline, and then I'll move on to dissertation just to discuss the differences. So the pipeline grant, like I mentioned before, is geared towards early career scholars. These are 1-year grants. And for individuals, the grants go up to $35,000. And for teams, it goes up to $50,000. Again, when you apply, you do not need to submit any information about your budget, maybe 1 or 2 lines describing how you'd like to spend the funding, but you don't need to submit a full budget at the time of submission. Unlike our research grant applications, the pipeline grant is a 1-step application. So for the pipeline grant, all you need to do is submit a 7-page single-spaced proposal with your up to 5 pages of CV. Again, the 7-page proposal does not include the references, charts, figures, any of that additional stuff. It's really just the 7-page proposal. Funding can include, can be used for summer salary, data collection, research assistance, course buyouts, and conference travel. And a big key to this is the mentorship component. So if you are selected to become a pipeline grantee, you will be partnered with a mentor who will be working to support you in developing your project. And at the end of your grant, you will be invited to present your project, or at whatever stage you are, it doesn't have to be completed. But you will be invited to present your project at the Pipeline Capstone Conference that we have typically in June or July of the following year when you receive your grant. Moving on to the dissertation grants. So as I mentioned before, again, this is another new program that we have designed to support young burgeoning scholars and also to help diversify this social sciences. But this one is particularly geared towards PhD students who are ABD. Again, this is a 1-year grant of up to $10,000. And this could be spent on things like participant fees, data collection, transcript, lab fees, and you could even get a stipend of up to $5,000, which could help to pay for things like rent or childcare. Just like the pipeline grant, it is a 1-step application process. In this case, you will submit a 5-page single-space proposal with a up to 5-page CV. And again, you do not need to submit a full budget at the time of submission. But if you want to include something, 1 or 2 lines describing what you would like to spend on is fine, but you do not need to submit a full proposal at that time. And I also like to note that if you receive a dissertation research grant and you eventually want to start applying to other grants at the Russell Sage Foundation, you are still eligible for the pipeline grant, even if you received a dissertation grant. You would only be ineligible for a pipeline if you received from our regular research cycle. Go on to the next slide, please.
We have a couple of other funding mechanisms at RSF. The first category is our visiting fellowships. These are opportunities where you come and spend a year or a half year in residence at the Russell Sage Foundation, doing research, taking part in our weekly seminars, enjoying our lunches, and being a part of the environment at Russell Sage. Our visiting scholars is a full academic year term for scholars that are 3+ years post PhD. It's a 1-step application process where you submit a 5-page single-space proposal with your CV, and you spend 1 or 2 semesters on an in-residence fellowship. The next deadline for these applications is June 25th, 2024, and that is for residents for the 2025-2026 academic year. The next category of fellowships that we offer are visiting researcher and journalist fellowships. These are also a 1-step application process. They're shorter in-residence fellowships than the visiting scholars. They're generally for maximum a half year, 1 semester term. The next visiting researcher deadline is May 7th, 2024, and that is for this coming academic year, September 2024 to June 2025. And then we are not accepting visiting journalist applications for the 2024 calendar year, so for this coming academic year. We also have summer institutes for early career scholars. The eligibility for these are PhD students, postdocs, early career faculty, and the Summer Institute that we will be running this summer is the Behavioral Economics Summer Institute. It'll be held just outside of Cambridge, Massachusetts. And the application deadline for that is March 29th. So that's just around the corner. And then lastly, we have a journal, the Russell Sage Foundation Journal of the Social Sciences, which is an open access, interdisciplinary, topic-based, and peer-reviewed journal. You can find out more information about the process for submitting to our journal on the website. All applications are submitted to RSF through Flux, which is an online portal. Please register. If you do not have an account, please register 48 hours in advance. We manually approve your registrations, and so sometimes it does take up to 2 business days for those to be approved. Our research grant application and review process is as follows. As we've discussed, for our core research grants, it's a 2-step application process where you submit a letter of inquiry. You get, if you pending positive reviews, then you'll be invited to submit a proposal. So after the April 16th LOI deadline, all applications will undergo an internal staff review where we review for fit with the foundation's priorities, if the project is at an appropriate stage for funding, and then some, but not all of those LOIs will be sent for external peer review, where reviewers with topical or methodological experience relating to the LOI will be asked to give feedback. LOIs that go to external review will receive comments back, regardless of whether or not they're invited to submit proposals. Invitations to submit proposals for this funding cycle will go out in mid-June 2024, and the proposals will need to be submitted by July 22nd. Then they go to external peer review. Pending the comments, we ask you to respond to those reviewer comments, and then the proposal, the external reviews, the responses to comments go to our advisory committees, which are committees of about 5 experts in each of our core fields. That's race, ethnicity, and immigration, social, political, and economic inequality, future of work, behavioral science, and decision-making and context. And they make a recommendation either to the board or for presidential approval, depending on the grant level. So our presidential grants, which are grants that we make under 75,000, just have to be approved by our president. For grants between 75,000 and 200,000, those need to be approved by our board of trustees, which meets 3 times a year to discuss the applications that are before them. So applications that are submitted for the April 16th deadline, the ultimate decisions will be made at the November 2024 Board of Trustees meeting, and the earliest start date for those will be January 2025. Please note that this 2-step application process is different from our dissertation research grants and our pipeline review processes, which undergo a 1-step process where after the external peer review, they go to advisory committee, and then we make the decisions because the amounts are smaller.
So a big component of our review process is the interdisciplinary reviewers. We are an interdisciplinary foundation, and we do our utmost to ensure that throughout the review process that there are different voices giving feedback on the applications that we receive. So the first stage, when you initially submit your LOI, it goes through an internal screening with RSF program staff. And this is basically kind of a desk reject type of situation where we assess each submitted LOI to see if they are a fit with RSF program's priorities and if they've also followed our submission guidelines. If you make it past that stage, then you are going to be sent out to external reviews. For the research phase or for the research grants, that is a 2-step process. So it will be externally reviewed twice, once at the LOI stage and once at the proposal stage. Again, we do our best to ensure that there is a mix of different types of scholars. Those scholars that have the expertise and the or methodological knowledge related to your project. So that way, you know, you're not just getting random feedback, but like actually substantive feedback from reviewers that, you know, either know the topic area or are very familiar with the methodological process that you are doing your research in. And in each review cycle, if you do get feedback, you get massed reviews back. So even if you do not get to the proposal stage, you will get massed comments back that we hope that you could use towards further developing your project moving forward. And you will also get that at the proposal stage as well. Now let's say that you make it past, you make it through both rounds of external reviewers. Your project will then be sent to the standing advisory committees for each of our program areas. And again, our standing committees are groups of interdisciplinary experts who are recruited based on their program areas. And they kind of assess and decide which proposals get moved to being presented to the board. So this would really only happen with projects that are considered trustees. And again, trustees are projects that are between the dollar amount of $75,000 to $200,000. If you are a presidential, then your funding would be approved by the president of our foundation, Sheldon Denzinger. Now, if the advisory committee feels that your project is substantive enough, it will be moved to our board of trustees, who will make all final decisions on proposals over $75,000. And that is our entire cycle.
When we are sending applications for external review, we ask reviewers to consider 5 questions. The main one is, are you asking important and compelling questions? Are you clearly stating your questions, hypotheses, and are they appropriately supported in terms of prior theory and empirical work? The second piece of this is we want to know if your proposed research design, data, and methods can answer those questions or evaluate those hypotheses that you're making. If you're making a causal claim, we want to know if there's sufficient power. We ask our reviewers if there's any additional expertise necessary to carry out the project. So that's generally asking them to look over your CV, your past work, and evaluate sometimes the timeline of your project. We want to fund research that is new and interesting and innovative. And so we ask, what's the likely contribution of the project to the social sciences? Is it advancing the literature? Is it resulting in a novel data set? And then generally we ask if there's anything else that they have to add that would help strengthen or improve the project. So our goal is to give you helpful feedback that you can take to improve your project, whether or not you're moved forward in our funding process.
So, why may have your project been declined at the internal screening stage? Well, there are a few reasons why that may have happened. First, it may not have been an RSF priority. So it could have been a project that was focused outside of the United States. And unfortunately, the Russell Sage Foundation only funds research that is US centered. It could have been a routine analysis of publicly available data. Again, we're looking for more, if you are going to use publicly available data, it would have to be something more innovative in a sense. But generally speaking, no, we do not fund those type of projects. RSF doesn't fund operational support or program evaluations, animal studies, things like that. That's not what we do. Or the project could have been something related or too closely related to health outcomes or education outcomes or the next possible reason could have been that the project is too preliminary, so perhaps you don't have access to certain data to show the feasibility of your project, or maybe you don't have the pilot data available yet and it's just a little too early. Not that it may not be funded, it's just that come back to us when you have more information. That's basically what we're saying. And some other reasons may just be lack of clarity in the data and methods. It is not a lot of space, but remember to use as much space as possible when you're writing your LOIs. And also, every funder is different. So we can tell when there is a copy and pasted project from another foundation. Do your best to tailor to our needs. And if you need support, we could always reach out and do our email. Or perhaps the project was a little too descriptive or causal, so that those could be the reasons why your project may have been declined at the initial stages.
Lastly, these are some tips and suggestions for your application as you're putting it together. Make sure the project is a good fit with the foundation's funding priorities. I can't stress enough that you should look over our website, look at all the information that we have out there for you about what we fund and don't fund, and make sure you're framing it in a way that matches some of the language and some of the questions that we might be interested in. We want your research questions to drive the proposal, not the data. So your research design data and methods should map closely to the research questions that you're asking. Show your strengths and limitations of the design, the methods, and the analyses. Please balance the narrative in your proposal and in your LOI. We don't really need paragraphs on your investigator qualifications, or your fit with RSF's goals. It's limited space. You have 4 pages. We have your CV. We'll be looking at it as well. We would like you to provide sufficient information for reviewers to evaluate the appropriateness of the methods. I would say that the majority of your LOI should be about your research methods and about how they can address the questions that you're asking. If you're asked to respond to reviews, do so seriously, graciously, and in depth. Reviewers take their valuable time to provide you with feedback, and it's in the spirit of improving your project. With your project, don't overpromise or exaggerate what it will do. We don't necessarily need your project to have a causal feature. So don't use causal language if you don't have causal design. When you're putting together your project, it'll be helpful to involve your Office of Sponsored Projects early, as they'll have good information about what sorts of things are feasible with the amount of money that you're requesting and things like that. It can be also helpful to utilize your peer network as you're developing your project for feedback, for advice on the grant application process. With your budget, give us some reasonable numbers, understand the worth of your research project. And as we've said, please look over the website. We've been sending some links in the chat, which will be helpful as you're starting to put together a LOI. And lastly, utilize program staff as a research before and after your application. As long as it's a reasonable time before the deadline, we're generally happy to answer questions about fit with RSF's funding priorities and give advice about framing. So you can send us an email at programs@rsage.org. So that's our email, that's our website. You can sign up for our mailing list as well. We're going to move into the question and answer portion of things. I'm pulling up the Q&A now.
While you're doing that, I can jump in for a couple of the questions.
Mhm.
So there's a question about what the pre-registration process looks like for experiments. So we're sort of open to a few different options. There's places like the Center for Open Science or OSF that allow these sort of these places that allow you to pre-register there. We accept all of basically a lot of these. Some I think the AEA does it for econ. You can register through them. What we want to see is that you pre-registered with someone. You don't have to pre-register with us. We just want to see that your hypotheses have been pre-registered with someone. A sort of like copy of the submission email or something like that would be sufficient for that. There's a question about whether we fund course buyouts, and that's sort of for the pipeline grants. The answer is unequivocally yes. For our other larger research grants, that question might be it depends on your course load. It depends on how urgent the study is. Like for some reason, maybe it's timed around the election or something that it can't happen during the summer or something like that. I think that answers that. The others of you can jump in if you have answers to questions as I scroll through them as well.
To answer the question, how do you decide whether or not a project is too preliminary to fund? I think that boils down to, what kind of data you have access to. Sometimes people will say things like, I'm going to do experiments or I'm going to do surveys, but then they don't have any tests or like field experiments, like, pilot data. And sometimes we're just like, well, come back to us when you have that pilot data, and then we could talk, basically. So I believe that's where we fall under when we say things are too preliminary. We're just like, come back when you have more information to back up your claims in your LOI.
I'll jump in. Oh, sorry, I guess I forgot we were supposed to turn our videos back on. I'll jump in to talk about the question about health outcomes. We consider things like mortality rates, births, various, like a lot of discussions around mental well-being. We would consider a mental health outcome. Again, if you have a sort of specific thing in mind that you're questioning whether this is something that we would count as this, please email us at programs@rsage.org. This is sort of again just a repetitive. Send us your abstract, send us your research question, send us your like a little bit of a maybe even up to a 1-pager or something, and we'll be able to sort of take a look at that and let you know what we think about it and whether it's a good fit for us as a foundation, which program, or anything like that.
I see a question about can the work focus on US engagement abroad? If I'm understanding the question correctly, maybe. It depends on what the question is and what type of research you're doing. So my colleague Stephen mentioned that we do compare, or sometimes we will consider comparative studies between the United States and others. I know of one project that has been funded by Russell Sage where we where a PI had interviewed US deportees in Mexico, right? So it depends on what exactly you mean by US engagement abroad, because that could be really a very broad and big statement. Do you have anything to add to that, Stephen?
No, send us an email with exactly what you're talking about. Like, but yeah, we can define US focus as pretty broadly. Like if I can imagine a project looking at sort of like US territories abroad, like Guam or Samoa, and we would count that as part of the US. But if you're talking about just like US military funding in other countries, maybe that's not enough of a connection to the US or something like that. But so it depends answer. feel free to send us an email to programs@rsage.org with your abstract, with your research question, giving us a little bit more to work off of, and that would be great. Yeah, I think if no one has any other questions, I think we can encourage, if questions pop up as you're thinking about this over the next, after this webinar, over the next couple of weeks, again, just reach out. We're here. If you have more specific questions about like what research costs can go to, you can ask. You'll notice a lot of those bullets said things like research assistants, summer salary, purchase of data, etc. Because yeah, we want you to have the funding you need to do the work, and we have some restrictions, sure, but like a lot of times these are, and it depends on what it's for and what the project needs. So if you have any questions about budget stuff, we're happy to answer those. If you have any questions about whether your thing is a fit or what program area you should be considering applying to, we're happy to answer all of these questions. I think we've mentioned with the caveat that the closer you get to the deadline, the more people are going to ask questions. So it's to your advantage to ask us those questions early.
Oh, and I would like to add one more thing. All of our applications are submitted through our grant making tool called Flux. So if you are planning on submitting an LOI at our next funding round, which is April 16th, you have to make an account in Flux. And then you basically have to register, and then we approve the registration. But make sure to do this well in advance, because sometimes, you know, when it comes very close to the LOI deadline, our inbox could be really crowded, and you know, we just need sufficient time to process the registration. So the sooner you get your registration done, the better.
And there's a how-to guide on the website.
But if, of course, if you do have any technical issues with the Flux software, then feel free to send us an email, that we could help you troubleshoot any issues that you're having via Flux.
All right, I think that's pretty good.
Oh,
I would say-
I just did see a question about registration. So it says, for portal registration, does the person have to be a PI or co-PI of the proposed study? Generally, I believe that we would prefer that person, whoever is the co-PI or PI, to be the one to register. So yes, ideally, yes, please.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And again, if you have any questions, please email us. We're happy to answer them, provided you give us enough time.
Thank you. Have a great day.